We are now seeing protests break out in Washington, D.C. over President Trump's push to make the streets of our capital safe again. Protesters in D.C.'s Northwest Corridor confronted law enforcement agents conducting a vehicle checkpoint. They screamed things like, "Get off our streets" and "Go home, fascists." Not sure why they're not screaming, "Get off our streets" to the criminals, but that's a different story. All of this backlash comes after the president's vow to make D.C. safe again, and the White House says agents and the National Guard will be patrolling the streets 24/7. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Compagno here with my co-host, Harris Faulkner. And also joining us today, Molly Line, Fox News correspondent, Marie Harf, Fox News contributor and former State Department spokesperson under President Obama, and Paul Morrow, Fox News contributor, attorney, and retired NYPD inspector. Now, activist groups are taking issue with President Trump's initiative to properly charge minors in D.C. responsible for committing violent crimes like robbery and carjacking, up almost 600%. The group Free D.C. Project posted this message earlier this month, claiming that, quote, "A 14-year-old is a child, full stop. We reject Trump's threats and the criminalization of our youth." But earlier this year, police picked up one 14-year-old girl connected to two armed carjackings within 6 hours. Meanwhile, D.C. officials say one man has been charged with a felony assault after he hurled a Subway sandwich at a border agent. Watch.
Why? You bitch! Oh! Oh! God!
Now we're learning that man allegedly walked up to those agents and called them fascists before the alleged assault. Attorney General Pam Bondi says that the suspect was actually a DOJ employee and has been promptly fired. And U.S. Attorney for Washington, Jeanine Pirro, sharing this message after the incident.
The president's message to the criminals was, if you spit, we hit. Well, we didn't quite do that the other night when an individual went up to one of the federal law enforcement officers and started jumping up and down, screaming at him, berating him, yelling at him. And then he took a Subway sandwich about this big and took it and threw it at the officer. He thought it was funny. Well, he doesn't think it's funny today because we charged him with a felony, assault on a police officer. And we're going to back the police to the hilt. So there, stick your Subway sandwich somewhere else.
I love that.
Love her. Paul, so much to unpack here, but I have to just start it with this because what I found so patently offensive about that video, the provocation of a border agent there from the luxury of someone who knows that that person will exhibit restraint, upholding the caliber and the professionalism of that role, and yet then runs like a coward in his pink top when he threw the Subway sandwich because he couldn't take it. He could dish it, but he couldn't take it. So now he's going to take it after the felony assault conviction.
Yeah, and he's wearing, the cops are wearing 20, 30 pounds of stuff, and he still couldn't outrun them. So, look, this is one of those things where you have to say to yourself, we've all had those moments where you wake up the next day and say, I did what last night? And I think you got about the worst case example here because this guy's life just went sideways, and good, because it does track to the deep state stuff that you've heard about. That guy is DOJ, and he thought that that was permissible? That tells you all you need to know. Now, to expand the story real quick. Look, I think of this as all of this going on in D.C. right now is a microcosm of the civil war going on inside the Democratic Party, because as we've seen, a lot of media entities now are saying we're aware of the fact that we got a crime problem here. Of course, because they work there, so it hits home, and so they're copping to it now. But so they're behind the scenes, they like all of this, but you have to remember that there's going to be the real diehards who are going to be out there fighting, throwing sandwiches, protesting, screaming, and yelling. So this kind of captures all of that. Donald Trump is well within his legal rights to do what he's doing in D.C., and he promised that he was going to be cleaning up our cities.
Yeah, he did.
So that was part of it. So he started that. What they really fear, this is what the hardliners really fear, that it's going to work. Because if it demonstrably works, it's exportable potentially to other cities. And so the nutjob archipelago of all of our other blue cities are sitting there saying, oh, God, is he going to do that to us? Here's the thing, though, we have to remember. There's a very limiting principle. D.C. is already federalized.
Right.
The other cities are not. And so we have to recognize that Donald Trump's power, even as president, is limited when it comes to the federal government doing this kind of thing in cities outside of D.C.
Harris, I want to focus for a moment on what I feel is so clearly been emphasized by U.S. Attorney Pirro and AG Bondi and the president, which is our concern right now is the criminal. We are protecting the citizens, and I'm not quite sure why the protesters seem intent on protecting the criminals. And the full stop child, well, these children are doing horrifically violent adult crimes, and so they will be prosecuted as such. When did it get skewed, and how is that defensible as we continue moving forward?
Look, the voices of skewing have some complicit players that have megaphones. We call them the legacy and liberal media. So, I mean, there is an opportunity for the left to continue to utilize, even though the ratings may be down in most cases, there's still voices and preaching to their own choirs. And so people are more likely to believe that if they're from the left and really do feel like they hate Trump and hate everybody who supports him. That still exists in this country. That divide has not gone away. But I do think it's interesting that people don't give President Trump enough credit to have meant what he said, because he clearly is walking out what he preached. And what he said was, I promise you. He said this to me as a candidate. I promise you what I will do is I will reach across the aisle, particularly in Democrat-led cities, and I want to help them clean this up. This was just hours before he was shot, thankfully survived the first assassination attempt on his life in Butler, PA. We were at Mar-a-Lago. Watch this.
The fact is that Democrat-run cities are doing very poorly. They're doing very poorly.
So what do you,
crime
as president, do?
And in every case, without virtually exception, the top 25 worst cities, worst crime cities are Democrats. It's very sad. I want to rebuild our cities. One of the things I want to do is rebuild our cities. I'm going to have to work with Democrats, and I expect that they'd want to do that. And I look forward to doing that. We have to rebuild our cities. Our cities are falling down. Our cities are an embarrassment, and we have to be very, very careful on crime.
Isn't that exactly what he's saying now? His last word was crime. Like, nothing he is doing right now is inconsistent with what he promised the majority of people in this country that he would do. And they voted for him. They weren't all MAGA. They weren't even all independents, like on the fence or something. No, some of these people were Democrats. Many of them were people of color living in these cities that said, and they're saying it now, we need something different. Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., just yesterday. Well, look, I mean, I'll work with the federal government. They didn't have the resources or the planning. I don't know what the deficit was, but this is where we are now. So what were Democrats doing that we couldn't dig themselves or dig ourselves as a community out of a hole? I mean, this is not the D.C. I remember as a kid when my dad was stationed at the Pentagon, but it is what we have now. And we have a president who's willing to lean in and fix it.
Yeah.
When we talk about the messaging, we've seen all of these interviews. Some of them are on Fox News. Some of them are on some of these other entities all across the country of people being interviewed in Washington talking about how impacted they have been by the crime. You know, so you can talk about some of the statistics that have come out in some of the liberal media where they push to say crime is not as big of an issue or it's trending in the right direction. But the lived experience that we're hearing from people on the street has been very different. There's also the president has the right to do this right now. And we know that it's constitutionally fair and that, in theory, Congress could act within less than the next 30 days to ensure that it can continue. And we'll see if there's a major change in Washington. I think right now, as you just saw with the Judge Jeanine Pirro, who's now, of course, the U.S. attorney there, it's about messaging. It's not about the ham sandwich. People are going to laugh about that and make jokes about let's indict the thrower and not the sandwich. But she's taking this very seriously and saying it's not just about the crime and the chaos being reined in, but about the agents that have been put out there on the street to do their work, not being taken advantage of, not being assaulted and violently assaulted, and saying that they're going to stand up to that as well.
Yeah. And Marie, I wanted to ask you about how Paul left off, which is that, granted, D.C. is in a different scenario than the other cities here in the United States for obvious reasons, but within the protective pocket, let's to make a football analogy. So if the president was a pocket passer, right, he has this pocket protected right now. And during this time, their aims are to dismantle and eradicate those laws that have been enacted by the very left-leaning D.C. City Council, the Youth Rehabilitation Act, the age of criminality being 18, the sealing records, et cetera, so that they can begin enforcing law and order and see that it will hold, it will stick. So my point is, in the protection of D.C., the model will be this is how law and order can be enforced at the local and state level. So will that model then translate and be accepted by all of these other Democrat cities that need help too?
Well, question number one is a lot of the cities with the most crime in the country are led by Republicans. This is not just a Democratic city problem. So the president doesn't talk about those, but there are a lot around the country in that list of murders, violent crimes that are Republican-led. Number two, I've lived in Washington since 2006, in the Washington, D.C. area and in Washington itself. Of course, we should have fewer carjackings, fewer crime. I believe that. You don't put a federal agent checkpoint on 14th Street in Washington, D.C., which is what happened last night. That is not the locus of crime in Washington, D.C. That's where, you know, senators and congresspeople and people that work in the White House go to dinner. They put a federal checkpoint on 14th Street and stopped every car. That is not actually addressing the crime problem in Washington. So while I hope they make Washington safer, I hope they make all of these places safer. That's not how to do it. That's performative. And the third point I would make, as a Washingtonian for many decades, is that it is very rich to say we are going to charge the sandwich thrower with a felony. When I was there on January 6th, and all of those people that assaulted police officers got pardoned, not just the nonviolent ones, not just the ones that went into the Capitol, everyone, including the ones that went after police officers, got pardoned. So don't tell me we care, that this administration cares about protecting police officers when they did not care about those on January 6th.
Respectfully, can we just stay?
But they got pardoned. No, those were police officers, Emily, and they got pardoned.
I want to talk about D.C. for a second.
But that was in D.C. That was in D.C. Those were D.C. police officers.
Can I just start with the fact checking on what you said?
Those were D.C. police officers
that got assaulted. So the top 10 cities for murder in 2025, St. Louis, Missouri. Who's leading it?
Where's cities like Memphis,
Hold on. Memphis is second. You said
Memphis.
Nashville's
you said a vast majority, a lot of. You said those were okay. Top 10.
Okay.
St. Louis, Memphis. One for your column. Baltimore, Detroit, New Orleans, Little Rock.
Right.
Two for your column. Two. Okay. 2 out of the 10.
Who's the mayor of New Orleans?
Okay, listen. Oakland.
That one that was in first class headed to France.
Oakland.
That got
Cleveland,
corruption charges.
Cleveland,
Tacoma, and Kansas City.
So how many of those are red states? Ohio's a red state.
Not the
Kansas is a red state.
The mayor of the city.
You're talking about the cities,
You
right?
were talking about the city. I'm just listening to what you said.
Harris, I said cities that are red. Some of those are, and almost all of those are in states that are led by Republicans.
But who's in charge of the city?
The city runs their criminal justice system.
Not
Furthermore, that's
entirely.
their duty. The district attorney is the one who makes the call as to what's going to be prosecuted.
The president was right. The majority of those cities.
You're missing a major point. You're using murder as the metric. Let's go to New York City, where murders are down, all right? And that's despite the criminal justice reforms. What we're talking about here is the quality of life of the people who live here. The city has fallen to ruin.
Paul.
And that stuff just doesn't get enforced.
Also, D.C. has a 6 times higher homicide rate than New York City.
It's Emily's segment, and I'm going to ask her for grace to give an example. Is that okay? Okay. A gunman has opened fire, and this is just recently reported not too long ago. It was under Biden's watch. A gunman opened fire outside of a restaurant in an upscale area of Washington, D.C., about a mile from the White House. Do you remember that night? Because you were living there, and diners at outside tables ran for cover. Look, this didn't just happen yesterday. This has been going on, and it's been a TikTok, which is why during the time that the president was running as a candidate, he was saying, look, there are problems that have been building. So this is a good example because it didn't just happen yesterday. It happened on Biden's watch. And I think it's worth bringing these things up because these are real felt crimes. And the majority of those cities are Democrat-led. I read you the top 10. I think you had 3.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.